Everybody hear me okay? Check one, check two. Everyone hear me okay? All right, thanks. It is such an honor to be here with you today. Thank you, Rick and Consuelo. That was an awesome lead-in. Consuelo reached out to me, a couple weeks ago and described what she looked for in entrepreneurs. And as I sat and listened to her, I went, oh my gosh, some of these traits, like resiliency, like optimism, planning, teamwork, etc., really tie to a lot of the endurance events that I've done over years. So I've spent a huge part of my life being an athlete. I'm going to talk about that. I would say kind of more of an adventurer than just a pure runner. But I think over decades of doing some pretty fun, exciting things, I hope that there's a few analogies and parallels that you can draw to your business here. My talk is called Shaped by the Trail, and I'm really going to talk about how the experiences I've been through have really shaped how I look at the world. All right. A little bit about me. So I'm a father. I have two beautiful daughters. These are my two girls, Ruby on the left. She's 6 now, and Phoebe, she's 9. They are truly my little adventure partners, and I take them everywhere. From 1 month old, they've been on the top of some of the peaks outside of Salt Lake City where I live. My wife, too, we got married on the edge of a cliff. Yes, we did make our family hike to the top of this peak. Anybody know where this is? This is, what'd you say? No, this is Observation Point in Zion National Park in Utah. My background is actually engineering. I'm not a full-time athlete, which I was, but I studied mechanical engineering in school and computer science. I've done robotics and spent time in a lab doing aerodynamics and fluid mechanics and things of this nature. I've been in the industry now for 20 years, and at this point I actually lead a pretty sizable engineering firm, and I love taking the things I'm going to talk to you about here today to the leadership of my team. In my teens and 20s, I was a rock climber, so before I got into running, I traveled the whole world rock climbing. So these are a few pictures here of climbing in the US. In the middle there, that's climbing up El Capitan, Yosemite, and New Zealand there in the far right. That climbing kind of turned into bigger objectives, looking at whole mountain ranges and rolling out a map and saying, how do I connect peaks together? And that took me to the Tetons, that took me to the Sierra Nevadas, that took me to the Wind River Range in Wyoming. And what I found was I was taking my climbing to these, instead of just maybe one cliffside or one peak, all of a sudden I was going for 10 or 15 or 20 hours. So I was sort of having this evolution as an athlete. That kind of turned into long-distance running. In fact, I was working in a lab for a professor who was training for a 100-mile race, which I thought sounded horrible. And I said, actually, I'll never do that. It just sounds horrible. And I walked out of his office, and my little mind started thinking, like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how quickly I sort of discarded this idea of this big challenge. And the next thing, I just started thinking about eventually seeing if I could tackle a race of that length as well. I was already doing, say, 20 hours in the mountains, so why not try to shuffle along the trail? This is an elevation profile from a race that I got into pretty early on in my ultra running career called the Hard Rock 100. So x-axis, distance there, 100 miles, and the y-axis is elevation. You might notice it's quite high. This is in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. Very, very high elevation. But I was really drawn to this type of race. I wasn't just running on a road for 100 miles. I wanted to go up and down peaks and hit a 14,000-foot peak and climb over a whole bunch of 13,000-foot passes. These are the types of races I was drawn to. And a lot of people say, why would you want to do that? Well, one answer, I'd like to answer this with pictures, really. Here's an example photo. So this is on the Hard Rock course. This is about 13,000 feet. So in addition to being long and hard, you're also working with some pretty thin oxygen up there. So here's a point in the race. I think this is mile 70, and I was feeling pretty bad. Everything was hurting, my mind was giving up, the sun was going down, I was tired. And I get to the top of this pass called Engineer Pass, and I'm greeted with this view. And I just took a moment and paused, and I'm like, this is amazing. I get to do things like this, and push myself in places like this. So I had a moment of real appreciation and gratitude for what I was able to do. Another scene from the Hard Rock System, pretty gnarly terrain. This is where my climbing background would come into play for sure. And this is from 2010. I think this was my 6th time running the race, and this year I won it. I ran it with my wife of 3 months at that point in time, so I was riding the emotional high of having just been married and starting that exciting chapter in my life. I think it really goes to say, too, the psychological role that the role that psychology plays in events. This was a real highlight of my life for sure. And I went on to become did my 10-time finish there. I was the youngest 10-time finisher of the race. I sort of took my climbing, my running, and I started going to big mountain ranges. This is the Wind Rivers. It's kind of southeast of the Tetons, and I decided why not traverse the entire mountain range north to south? Sounds like a good idea, right? Kept going with that. This is a project that a friend of mine and I did in Idaho. We decided to link together all the high points in the state of Idaho, all the 12,000-foot peaks in Idaho. Believe it or not, a state known for potatoes has terrain like this. So this is a Lost River Range where we linked together all the peaks that you see there. We set a record there, 28 hours and 18 minutes, kind of linking together all the high points. Another photo from that. I ended up building a really important friendship here with a buddy of mine. We went on and did the same thing in Utah. These are all the 13,000-foot peaks in Utah. We strung them together in a 33-hour spree of fun in the mountains. And I guess a little closer to home here in Utah, I thought it sounded like a good idea to run from the low point in Badwater Basin to the high point, to Mount Whitney. So a buddy of mine and I did exactly that. We started down there, started at midnight actually running across Badwater because it's hot. And I think at midnight it was still about 90 degrees. And extreme highs and lows, both elevation-wise, temperature-wise, emotionally, highs and lows, and ended on the top of Mount Whitney. Okay, and then there's the Barkley, and it's kind of one of the things I want to focus on here because it's been such an experience for me. The Barkley is the name of a race. This is a race in eastern Tennessee. And it's arguably one of the quirkiest races out there in the world, and I'll take a minute and explain why it's such a fascinating event. So first off, it's quite challenging. One way to measure a race is distance, another is ascent, like how much cumulative ascent does a race have. And here's a few peaks down here. Mount Olympus is one near where I live. It's considered a really hard hike, about 4,000 feet again. Mount Rainier, if you did it from the trailhead, about 10,000 feet of ascent. If you decided to do Mount Everest from the ocean, you'd go up about 29,000 feet. The Hard Rock 100, which I just showed some photos of, is about 33,000 feet of elevation, considered a very difficult race. And believe it or not, this little race in Tennessee has about 70,000 feet of ascent. A little bit hard to believe, given where it's at, but it's a remarkably steep course. There's essentially nothing flat on this course anywhere. So it's a challenging physical endeavor. Let's see, a little hard to read here, sorry about that, but let me hit some of these unique challenges. And talking to Consuelo, I think some of the things that make this event unique actually apply to being an entrepreneur, to starting a business. So as I read through these, think about what that might mean to you or to starting a business. First off, getting into it's really tricky. There's no easy way. It's kind of hard. You have to figure out your way through. The application process is secretive. There's even an exam. There's mathematical proofs you have to do to sort of get into this. And I can't say too much about the process there. One really interesting thing is that once somebody finishes, which doesn't always happen, the race evolves. And it gets harder. So over the 35 years that this crazy race has been going on, there's been a 1% finishing rate, right? So most races, you go run, say, the Boston Marathon, and the next time you do it, you want to go faster, you want to get, have a better outcome. What's fascinating is that this race always adapts to keep it barely possible. And so over all the years it's been going on, 1% finishing rate. The start time. Most people know when a race starts, right? You show up and the race starts at 6 a.m. or whatever time. Bottom line is you know when it starts. This race you don't. So you're actually in the area and there's a 12-hour window of time that this race could start. Of course, it's not marked. Most races you know where you're going. This one has a route that you must follow, but it is not marked. The only way that they sort of prove that you do it is at the high points of the race and at the low points. There's a physical book, like on your table here, a book where you tear out a page that corresponds to your bib number, and you sort of collect these around as you go around this course. And in the end, you sort of demonstrate that you did the course by having the pages that you collected. It does a loop around a big park. So this is Frozen Head State Park in eastern Tennessee. And it kind of goes around this 20 to 30 mile loop, depending on how much you get lost. That throws things at you. The person who puts this on, he'll change directions for the 5 laps that makes up this race. You can team up. In fact, historically, people have formed partnerships for 1, 2, 3, 4 laps. But one thing that's forced is on the 5th lap, no one's ever allowed to team up. So you're forced to have this solo experience should you make it to the final lap, which again doesn't happen very often. There's no technology. So it's not marked. There's really no support. And all you get is an old school paper map and a compass. And whatever thought you've put into this the few hours before you started the race, to plot your course, to come up with bearings, to figure out how you're going to go through this. So intentionally no technology. You can't even bring a watch with you. No GPS, no camera, no music, map and compass. It's often really bad weather given the time of year. It take place in March or April timeframe. And SARS, search and rescue, won't be deployed for, historically now there have been people who've been 30 hours behind when they should be back in camp on the loop. And I think they start to talk about a search and rescue team if you're gone for about 30 hours. Interestingly, there's no mandatory gear. There's no list that says if you bring A, B, and C, and D, you're good to go, which is very unusual. Most races in this world, it's sort of laid out for you, especially if they're high-risk events. You need to bring all these things, but this race does not do that. It's really fascinating. I'll talk about the effect I believe that has later. And they give you 60 hours. So this is 5 laps around a park, about 130 miles long. 60 hours sounds like it should be enough. But what's interesting is in recent years, people are taking all of that time. I think the most recent finish had like 12 minutes to spare on a 60-hour race. Okay, so I've been out there a number of times. I finished 3, 2012, 14, and 16. And I want to share with you, I think, what's got me through it. But note that I also have failed quite a few times as well. So I highlight the successes here, but in many ways, I think the years I have not finished are the ones that have taught me the most. So I will say this, over my years out there, I've become fascinated by the human beings that show up here. These are some quotes from Gary Cantrell, who puts the race on. He says, "You can't really succeed if there's not a possibility you'll fail. Then you can't have a huge success unless you will probably fail." Everybody who goes out there knows the odds are stacked against them. 99% of the people who start this race will not finish. And I love, and I suspect many of you in the room would as well, love that mindset, that type of person who shows up knowing the odds are stacked against them, but they're motivated by it. I think that's one of the most interesting things about this race, for sure. And I've made some really amazing friends from all over the world. It's also probably one of the most international fields of runners of any ultramarathon I've been to. Okay, so what does it take to finish? So, if we had more time, a lot of the questions I get are, how do you train, and what type of gear do you bring, what kind of shoes do you wear, nutrition, logistics, technology, communication, etc., etc. We don't have time for that. which is good because what I really want to focus on, I think, is the far more important components that differentiate between finishing not, which is in your mind, for sure. You have to be trained, you have to have the things on the left sorted out, but really the difference between finishing not is in your mind. So that's what I'm going to focus on. Like a lot of things, I think you got to start with why, right? Someone once said, if you can't define your why, you'll be mediocre at best. In the running world, a lot of people say, I want to run a 5K or a 10K or a half marathon, etc. Their description of what they are striving for is a distance. They want to check that box. And that's great. For me, with Barkley, when I first started thinking about it, my why was I was obsessed with the process. I wanted to go through the highs. I wanted to go through the lows, every bit as much. I wanted to see how it would push me. I wanted to see what I would learn. I wanted to see how I grow. That was my why. Finishing was just sort of this thing that if it happened, great. But I was really intrigued by the process. I'd read a ton of race reports and sort of secondhand learned what people had gone through, and that was really intriguing to me, the process. I think if you have the right why, you're able to push yourself through things that you might not otherwise. I think there's for sure business applications here as well. If you run a business and the only thing you measure is, say, revenue growth or some financial metric, I think you're going to struggle to really motivate, the team and the people that work for you. If you can just really hit in the heart and in your soul and really drive a why, people will move mountains. Okay, separate signal from noise. So I want you to try to put yourself in this position. This is a picture from the camp where the Barkley starts and ends. It does 5 laps, and you're always coming back to the spot you see here. The evening before the race, so a map's been rolled out, people are starting to learn about the course. And again, you don't know when it's going to start, right? And people come around, hey Jared, what do you think? When is the race going to start? Is it going to start at 2 a.m.? Is it going to start at 10 a.m.? I heard that because, it's a quarter phase moon and, tomorrow's going to be 72 degrees, that he's probably going to start at midnight, just to make it really hard. And what I love about this, and I've been out there quite a few times, is in the absence of information, people come up with these narratives, right? They want to fill in this story that makes sense to them. And oftentimes, it's a story that causes great stress. And so I see people really worrying, and I really wish it would start at this time, or I wish that it would start at noon. And they look to me like, what time do you want it to start? What time do you think it's going to start? And I say, I really have no preference at all, because it is 100% out of my control. And for me to have a preference is setting myself up to be upset, right? If I think I want it to start at 6 a.m. and it starts at 5 or 2 or 10 or 12, it's something different than what my mind was expecting and hoping for. Therefore, I'm already starting at a disadvantage. And so my mindset there for sure is I genuinely have no preference. It's 100% out of my control. Whenever it starts, it's good with me. And I go to bed. And it was so interesting around camp, you can just feel this anxiety around there. Nobody can sleep. This whole race, this little component of the race, of the unknown start time, is created to cause stress and see how you respond to it. And it's one of the reasons I would argue that nobody finishes, is it's that stress management. How do you deal with that, the unknown, the uncertainty? If things are truly out of your control, don't waste time and energy. And I think the race has all these little funny pieces that most people are so confused by, but I've come to have this perspective that the race is intentionally throws these things at you to see how you respond to them. Okay, learning and not failure. So 2016, I was out there with a friend, Gary Robbins, from British Columbia, Canada. We were cruising along. We did lap 1. We were out in the lead. Everything was great. And it's a little hard to see here, but this is a topographic map, and we were kind of following the spine of this ridge. Again, there's not really a trail out there. So you're sort of map and compass and vectoring down this hill, and we sort of rolled off too far to the left. And all of a sudden we bumped into a road, and we didn't know where we were. And mind you, I knew of Gary. He's very well known across the world. But we'd only spent, at that point, 12 hours together. And so we sort of hit the spot. We knew we were in the wrong location, and all of a sudden we had to figure out how to get back on course. A navigational error like this in Barkley could turn into an hour or 2 or 3 of being lost. This was an opportunity. So on one hand, we had screwed up. On the other hand, it was an opportunity to see how the two of us could work through this problem together. So we got out our map and compass, and we looked at where north was and what angle the Earth was falling away. We sort of deduced we must be here, and therefore let's go that way on this old road that we found and see if we can get back on track. We did it. We had contained the problem. We only added 2 miles, and we only lost an hour. And we took off in the right direction. And a lot of folks might say, oh my gosh, I just lost an hour, I just added 2 miles. But Gary and I launched into this thing going, oh my gosh, huge win. We just overcame this thing together. We worked through it, we talked through it. And so we took this otherwise negative part of the race and flipped it around. And really, our confidence just went up after we screwed something up. We've gone to do some pretty awesome things together. Some other races and events outside of Barkley that are up to 50, 60 hours long. And we learned a lot together. And I consider him one of my best friends. I've learned a lot about teamwork and communication too. Let me hit these really fast. Complementary skills. Gary and I are very different people. And right out of the gates, we had this open discussion about his strengths, his weaknesses, and the same for me as well. We had to make sure that we were aligned in our objectives, and the communication was great. The planning phase, when we're in the middle of the project, which can be up to, in our case, 60 hours, and throughout the event, that communication was really critical. And Gary taught me a lot. He was very clear as we're marching along. He said, Jared, here's how I'm doing. I want you to know that this is hurting, and I'm going to get through it. I'm going to be just fine. And so, awesome communication through the project. For key decisions too, right out of the gates, he said, Jared, if ever you're questioning my decision navigationally, I want you to talk about it. I want you to bring it up. I think it's so easy in events like this to have your ego get in the way and just overshadow, your communication. And it's one thing I love about the things I've done with him is right out the gates, we say, if ever you have any doubt about the direction I'm going, I want you to call me out and I want you to talk to me about it. And then spread the load out. Sometimes he'd be strong, sometimes I'd be strong. We would figure out ways, even including like shuffling weight around, who was carrying what. We'd level it out, because you're only as good as your average. If he's super strong and I'm weak, we're only going to move at the average. So we've gone on to do some awesome things. If I had more time, I'd tell you about some cool projects in the high mountains of Colorado. Groupthink. One might think, given my experience at Barkley, that people would assume that I know exactly where I'm going. And this is not the case at all. I've been out there years, and I get a train of people that follow me and try to hang on while I'm going somewhere, and I've screwed up in many instances. And so what I've learned over the time is I'll flip it, and I'll have, if someone's with me, I'll say, you lead, and I'll sit back and watch them try to deduce where to go. Turn left, turn right. Groupthink, teaming up in Barkley has led to a lot of success there, but it's also led to a lot of failures when people make assumptions about who knows where they're going. And in the business sense too, you might assume that like the industry is going in this direction. You should always be questioning those things. All right, 100% ownership. Barkley is one of the most dangerous races in the world, I would argue. There's numerous stories about these incredible search and rescue efforts that don't start for after 30 hours. There's no required gear, as I said. And what's fascinating is everybody that shows up, the small group of people in the world that gets selected to go there, end up showing up incredibly prepared because nobody laid out the process for them. They had to come up with it on their own. Hyper-prepared people, I would say. Own your success and own your failures too. I think the most interesting thing about Barkley is at the finish, when everybody's failed, and you look around and see how people dealt with it. Did they sort of walk away in shame because they failed? Or did they own it? Are they part of it? Did they get engaged by it? Did they double down? Did they come back stronger the next year? To me, that's probably the most interesting part of the event, because it's pretty rare that someone succeeds there. Failure is more often the case. In fact, Gary, if you have time after this, there's a movie called Where Dreams Go to Die, and it's about his multiple years trying to finish this, and there's an incredible finish there. I don't want to ruin it for you, but the way Gary handles it at the end, I've known him for years and respected him tremendously. The way he dealt with kind of the ultimate failure there, he stood up, he owned it, and he said, yep, I'm going to accept the outcome. I don't want to give it away, but watch it. And I looked at my friend from afar and went, one of the most incredible humans in the world, and how he handled that. Okay, have a roadmap. So for the course, you sort of learn what the course is the night before, and it's on a paper map on a table, and you have a little bit of time to sort of transcribe what you're seeing onto your own map. You run back to camp and you're figuring out bearings. And this is just an example here. This isn't the Barkley course. This is actually my backyard in the Wasatch Mountains. But what I'm trying to show here is having key points with bearings between them, but then not much resolution between those 2 points, right? And I see a lot of people in the race really stress that they don't know every little twist and turn the whole way. My point with this is knowing the major directions between milestones is about as much as you want, and be okay with the fact that there's an adventure in between, and you need to adapt in between. For me, I think about business too, technology roadmaps, really similarly. There's no way you're going to ever have it perfectly mapped out, but having a rough direction and adapting on the fly is kind of the key. All right, hyper-intentional learning. At Barkley, you're always a student, or at least you have to be a student, even as many times as I've been out there now. I'm always suggesting people to absorb as much as they possibly can, not just visually. People have said so-and-so has a photographic memory. That's really helpful for sure out there, to be able to see and memorize everything that you see there. But I would say a full sensory map. I'm like listening, my ears, my eyes, my smell, really trying to learn the course. What does it sound like when I'm going down this ridge? What does the creek over here sound like? Because I might need that, and I might need that perception later. And what does it look like from all angles? As I'm running down a hill, I'm actually turning around also and saying, what will it look like in the other direction? Really trying to learn as much as you possibly can. The best way to stay on track is to know where not to be. So I've been lost there many times, and whenever I'm lost, I'm like, this is an incredible opportunity to learn where I shouldn't be. And the next time I'm there, I'm going to really know to not go into their hill. The other thing too, the last one there is ask what others see, feel, hear, and experience. When I'm at Barkley with a new person, I say, ask everybody, what did you see? Did you see that rock? Did you see that tree? Like, what are all your markers? We all pick up different things. But it has to be the most intentional absorbing of everything around you to be successful. So Barkley is a real stimulus and response test. I'll skip to the bottom here. But for me, when I recognized that the race is designed to test how you respond to stress, it changed my whole outlook on life. So when I realized it's more than just running a certain number of miles per week, I started to look at anything challenging in life that throw at me and say, this is awesome. Like, this really hard thing is training for the race. It's hard to put in a spreadsheet that I logged 50 miles that week, but I had this hard thing that happened, and I had the opportunity to see how to respond to it. That was training for me. Wait, I'm going to go back. Okay, so my first year, I was training in the winter. The race is in March, and I live in the Wasatch Mountains, which most people are skiing. Smarter people are skiing that time of year. But in the winter for me, I really recognized I needed to train my mind to see everything challenging that came my way in a positive way. Like find the silver lining in every situation. And so here's some situations on the left: being lost, running out of food, not getting enough sleep. You can see all the things there. I started to flip them around and say, what are the opportunities? Every one of these has an opportunity in it. And I think beyond just some of these things, which you might experience on the trail, if I was at work and something hard happened, or a really challenging personal situation, there's always a way to flip it around and find something constructive in that situation. Which kind of ties into this notion of reframing. People ask me all the time, have you ever been injured? Have you ever been injured? Well, yeah, I've had just about every issue. I've had stress fractures and tendon problems. I started to reframe what I would call it. I would say I've had plenty of opportunities to adapt. And I really think that there's something to that. If an injury is your body kind of responding to a load that it's not used to, but the result is you come back stronger. That patellar, that tibial stress fracture, my body adapted and became a little bit stronger because of that. So they really are opportunities to adapt. I would flip this sort of negative term of injury into an opportunity. I shattered my ankle once climbing in 2006, and the doctor told me I needed to find a new sport. But I thought this was an incredible opportunity to work on my upper body. And most runners get really strong legs, but they have little skinny arms. And so I took this opportunity of a shattered ankle and found a company that sponsored me with some awesome crutches, some forearm crutches, and just changed my goals. And I ended up crutching up a bunch of mountains. I crutched a half marathon, and it was an incredible opportunity there. Okay, so I know we want to leave a few minutes for some Q&A here, but just to summarize here, again, these are the mental aspects of Barkley that I believe are the key. Starting with why, having this really strong, compelling, in your heart reason you're doing it. Separating the signal from noise. In today's world, we have endless amounts of noise being thrown at us. Consciously figuring out how to filter that out and focus on what matters is very, very important. Learning and not failure. I think failure has a negative connotation, and really if you look at everything hard that you learn, you go through, and look at it like a positive learning experience, that's helpful. Partnership's been key for me. A lot of these things might sound like these solo experiences, but the greatest successes have come out of me building these incredible relationships, like with Gary Robbins. Avoiding groupthink. And as I've mentioned, 100% ownership. Both of the failures and the successes, I think, is important. Having a roadmap's been a key piece for me as well. Again, I think the resolution where you have general milestones that you want to hit, and you know that it'll be an adventure that you have to adapt in between, I think is important. Being very intentional about learning and always learning at Barkley has been key. The condition to optimism, I can't say enough about that. And embracing the adversity. I think for me, these have been the things that have helped me get through this, the 3 years I've finished. So I'll end with a quote here. Between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. That's from Man's Search for Meaning. And I think we'll take some questions.
Turn it on, turn it on.
Thank you so much for that. Quite fun to hear that presentation. One of the things that I'm struck by hearing you talk about this is you're doing something that's totally new, right? The course is different. And when you think about the preparation for the course, I'm curious to know how you think about building your support team, or how you build, not necessarily your training plan, but how you articulate or identify those areas where you're like, look, I think this might be something that I need help with. Where do I find that? And then also, the second part of that question is thinking about considering the course as uncharted, which is uncharted. how to be cautious of being aware of your blind spots when you're building your team. You're like, okay, I know I'm not great at blank, so I'm going to have somebody help me think about this. But then the next level beyond that, maybe I don't know I'm not great at this because I've never had to do it before. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? How do you build that support network?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. Barkley's interesting because there's only so much planning you can do up front, right? There's really not a lot of information about the course until you start or until the night before. The key thing for me has been to, learn as much as I can and have a rough plan for how it's going to go. And it's never going to go exactly as you plan, but the key thing for me has been teaming up with the right person too. Because I might have a rough idea of what the loop's going to go like, again, the course of loops, but for me it's been making sure I have someone by my side that I know we can work through it. I've highlighted Gary Robinson a lot because we've done a lot together, but that's been really key to be paired up with someone that you really trust, immensely. And back to the communication thing, we discussed up front, I'm a really good navigator and then he's really good at other things. And sort of consciously knowing where the strengths are and weaknesses has been really key. What was the second part of your question? Sorry.
I'm curious how you think about those unknown or yet to be identified weaknesses and how you account for those.
Mm-hmm.
How do you account for those, if you have them, let's say hypothetically, yet to be identified weaknesses, and thinking through that sort of the unknown unknowns in preparation?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the unknown unknowns in preparation. So kind of some of my closing thoughts there about intentionally seeing the challenges that come as training for that. You'll never know what you're going to bump into, right? I mean, I've lost 6 or 7 hours in the race in a completely different drainage system, as an example. And I just had to know how I could kind of survive through that and eventually get back on track. Once I had some mile marker, I'm okay, I know where I am again, now I can get back on track. The reality is you can never plan for everything, right? So you just have to mentally, the main thing too, I would say, is when things get derailed, be okay with it, not let it throw you off. I think in a lot of races, especially more common, trail races, since we were talking about that earlier, you hear these things where someone got off trail for a half mile and they were devastated, right? And they dropped out of the race. Oh my gosh, I lost 5 minutes or 10 minutes or half an hour. Just getting in the mindset where when you get derailed, you recognize that's just part of the process. You know what I mean? I see that a lot. In Barkley, you're always going to get derailed. And so just recognizing when you get derailed, not letting it be a source of stress at all, and just saying, cool, this is part of the process. I'm at that part now where I'm derailed. And how do I just figure it out, be calm, come back to the things I know and get back on track. And then leave that little challenge better for it or stronger for it. Like when Gary and I got lost. Lost an hour, back on track, and we felt stronger for it and better for it. I think there's lots of business things too. When you get to that challenge, working through it as a team can really be a strength builder for you. Hopefully that helps. Yeah.
When you're very long races, when you sleep, how to be able to sleep differently? Here's what they have.
Yeah, the question was about long races and sleep deprivation. Do you get sleep? I've experimented a number of times with different ways to do it. Let's see, my first time there, I went 2 laps, I slept for an hour, 2 more laps, slept for an hour. I had the luxury back then of being able to sleep for an hour, but you don't really now. The course is quite a bit harder. But it really becomes this game. I think the mind really starts to break down after 40 hours, at least for me. And you start to lose the ability to make, rational decisions. Navigationally is the big thing. So for me, it becomes this game of this return on investment kind of. If I sleep for 30 minutes, do I have enough of a cognitive boost from that it's worth that 30 minutes? And so for me at this point, I maybe sleep 30 to 40 minutes over 60 hours. But that 30 to 40 minutes is a huge game-changing difference from pushing through straight and not sleeping at all, which people try to do as well.
Thank you so much. Well, I'm a little bit curious because I see that you did complete his career 3 times, right? 2012, 14, and 16.
Yep.
What happened in 13 and 15? Did you ever try those years? And why try to do it again after I did it the first time? I will say I would put my banner, take pictures, and never did it again. Why are you trying to do it again?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I haven't been out there all years. I think 2013 I did go back. So 2012, because the course isn't marked, your first year there is one where you are absolutely a student and a follower. And so I had to team up with somebody and just do all I could to stay with them and learn from them. But I did have this thing in my heart that wanted to do it on my own. And so I went back. 2013, I failed. I got lost, and I think I lost 7-8 hours in the fog and in the rain. And so I came back the subsequent year in 2014 and did do every step of it on my own, 59 hours and change. So like my first year was just finished. I really wanted to come do it on my own. And then my third time that I finished, I found a lot of enjoyment in trying to be the mentor, the guide, and I helped a friend along, Gary, actually, who you heard about earlier. So I think every year I've been there, I've been searching for something different every time. I get the question a lot. People think I'm crazy for going back there, but I genuinely, over years of doing this, every year I learn a lot about myself, and I love the mindset that it puts you in to push yourself that far in that hard. I don't always have it too. There's years I've failed where I just haven't had, that 100% commitment. So, yeah.
So there are a lot of good parallels with life, but even in a race like this, there's an end, right? And you don't always have an obvious end in endeavors in life. Like you read or see examples of people who, some of you like, how do they keep getting funded for something? And you think, that should have never happened. They should have stopped earlier, right? Or it's like, that was heading towards failure. So do you, in this kind of, do you ever get to a point in your failures where you go, yeah, it's not happening? Like, because you see people who, from, when you're at distance, you think they should really stop what they're doing, right? And eventually, they fail, and you go, yeah, they should have known it, they should have seen it. Like, do you ever have that? Do you recognize that?
Great question. Yes, I think so. I think for me, we all have our stories, and I think most stories have a good conclusion at times. And for me, too, I've been out there years now, but my life's pretty different. I have 2 beautiful girls that I talked about at the beginning, and I feel like I've learned a lot of the things I wanted to learn out there, and I love sharing actually the things I've learned. I love trying to take some of these things and teach them to my children, my daughters, and I've talked a lot at schools too. I guess my point is, even for me and my experiences at Barkley, I'm not of this mindset of just go on this forever. Even I feel like there's like a finality to it, but a way to really wrap up all the positive things I have done there and share it with others.
I mean, in the middle of a race, during the race, like have you ever been in the middle of a race and you felt, okay, it's not happening this year, and if that is something, that sensation you have recognized outside of races?
Yes, I mean, there's years that I have not finished. And I think you have to, Consuelo and I talked about, how do you know when enough is enough, right? When do you draw that line? And I mean, I have found myself being obsessively committed to this to a point. And I've been really injured there before and hobbled my way back in. And Yeah, but I think for me, there's this shift in your mind where you say, okay, this is good. This was not my year. This is not my time on this. So I highlight the wins I've had out there, the successes I've had out there, but honestly, the failures too have probably taught me a lot more. And where I've had to walk away with my tail between my legs. And for me, even that failure, I think it's been really important to step back and say, what did I learn? What could I change? What could I do differently? I really write it down. I'm pretty methodical about everything that went wrong in the event. And still walk away feeling better for it, even though it was technically a failure.
Okay, I believe that's all the time we have. Thank you, Jared, for that amazing keynote. And
If anyone wants to ask another question, we have some time because it's the break.
okay, yeah, another question? Anyone? Go ahead.
Hi, Jerry. One question. You talk a lot about the partnership and the team building that you need to build like one night before the competition start, from what I hear. When do you know it's not the correct partner, and what do you do about that? Because if that person if you are following that person, maybe that can lead you to the wrong places, right? So you need to readjust in the race.
It's a great question. I would say kind of the more challenging things I've done, I've had a lot of time up front to make sure it's a good alignment and a good partnership. In a race like the Barkley, you might at the beginning try to team up with someone and eventually it's not working for whatever reason and break away. I think breaking away and going on your own, which I've seen people do, it's just almost guaranteed failure for at least someone new in the race, So again, for me, I have a primary person or two that I want to team up with, but kind of knowing that it might not always pan out that way. I've always had these little backup plans, I think that upfront work and making sure you work with someone. And in the end, having someone said at breakfast, we've suffered together for many years. Somebody said that.
I did.
You did, yes. In the end, I've been very fortunate to have identified the right people to team up with, and wow, do we have a strong connection now, having been through such challenging times. I have done adventures where the dynamics didn't work out. In some cases, some of these projects, athletic projects, it's not a scenario where you can jump out and bail, and so you have to figure out how to carry it on to the end, And honestly, I've seen that go wrong in several cases as well, where the dynamic wasn't the same or the communication was broken. And at that point, it becomes how do you just sort of salvage the project and soldier on to the end. I've had several that haven't worked out well at all. And you just, you sort of get isolated and all the plans fall apart, right? But I think for the most part, I've marched into projects with the right people, and it's, 99% of the time it's been a good alignment there.
I have one question. So you mentioned that you team up and it's great during the Barclays, but the very last loop you have to do it on your own.
Yep.
And I think another common thread between that, being an ultra runner, and entrepreneurship is it's also a very lonely journey. Many times, you have a team, but a lot of the struggles, a lot of the stress, anxiety, it's lonely. So when you have had to partner and then you end up doing the final loop on your own, coming out from that team that you have the support and sharing and problem solving and navigating, and then suddenly you're out there on your own. I remember saying when Gary and I think it was the first time Gary tried the Barkley, and he was very positive until he finished the fourth loop. And some people I think his wife was thinking that he would come way past the end of the fifth loop, I remember what time. So what do you think happens during that lonely journey on the last loop? That maybe some people are you overconfident before and maybe, you're like, well, actually, this is way harder, on your own? What happens during that transition?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, that year, it was 2014, and 2016, and I was the third year. I remember, so the whole thing is 5 loops. Gary and I did 4 labs together. And I recall in like 2, 3, and 4, he had this tendency to just sort of follow behind me and just sort of head down and just, follow Jared, wherever Jared goes. And I was like, no, Gary, I want you in front. I want you learning. The leader always learns more. Like I'm doing you a disservice to let you follow me. You know what I mean? And I guess thinking forward to where I wanted him to be able to operate autonomously, I intentionally put him in front. And we navigate together, and I'd sort of watch him. I knew we needed to turn left here, and he'd sort of get there and be like a little bit, confused. And my point was, I knew we would eventually not be together, and probabilistically, I was going to have more success because I knew the course. And so I really wanted to tee him up so that he had as much knowledge as he could to operate on this, because that was a reality of the event. And so for at least the lap 4, I was like forcing him to learn as much as he possibly could. And ended up, he didn't finish, if you dig into that, which I know you have, which is so unfortunate. But we were together with this rock solid team, but I also knew that in the future meant we would be on our own. And so my strategy with that was to really do everything I could to set him up for success on that.
Well, I guess that's probably a great way to close this session. And thank you very much, Jared.
All right, thank you all.